This is Midweek Politics with Dave Pakman.
Welcome back to Midweek Politics. I'm David Pakman. Joining us on the phone and on Skype. I can see him there. It looks like he's sitting in front of some books and looks like a sunny day there in New York City. Professor Emeritus of Economics at my alma mater, the University of Massachusetts, currently a visiting professor at the New School University in New York City. You know, I was one of your about 400 students in your Intro to Macro class. Of course, we never met because it's such a huge class. Did you like teaching those huge seminars?
I hate to admit it, but I did. I found there's something almost
magical in standing in front of a group as large as 400, trying to get something across. You're somewhere between a teacher and a stand-up comedian.
Well, I'll tell you, you were both funny and a good teacher. I mean, I enjoyed it, and it was kind of my first, I was a freshman, and it was my first introduction to college economics. I had taken some in high school, but also my first introduction to Marxist theory, and just looking around and seeing how people processed what you were telling them for the first time in most cases, it was interesting to me. I could see why you might prefer 20 or 30 people sitting in front of you instead of 400.
Well, you know, I thought that myself, but it turns out these are really incomparable experiences. They're completely different. What goes on in a small seminar room or even a small classroom is a different moment, a different experience from a large room. A good education should never be limited to the large ones, but it isn't a terrible way to convey, especially if you have a good teacher who really is into it and likes it. It's a good way to convey the material, but also the excitement of a committed teacher to it. I know that part of my excitement is I really like economics. I like what I've learned by studying the economics of society. So it was kind of a wonderful chance for me to try to get across the sense of mastery of one's world one gets if one understands the economic system instead of being mystified and intimidated by it.
Speaking of being mystified and intimidated, Christine O'Donnell proposed a definition of a socialist economy. And she said when 50% or more of your economy is based on the federal government, you have a socialist economy. So let's assume we could understand what she meant, because I can't really understand when she says based on the federal government. Is there some kind of set definition we can look at to decide, are we in a socialist economy or not?
Yeah, I had the same moment of embarrassment when I read what she had said. It reflects not only that she obviously never studied the subject, but it's a kind of an American sense that there's something intrinsically evil about the government, and that if we have economic problems, it's the government we ought to blame. You know, in other countries, when you have, for example, unemployment, people kind of understand that the reason you have unemployment is when private employers fire you. It isn't the government that fires people to make big unemployment. It's the private sector. You know, in the United States, for example, over the last 3 years, we have thrown about 7.5 million people out of work. Out of that, 500,000 were laid off by the government. The other 7 million were laid off by the private sector. So if you're upset or critical about unemployment, the first place you ought to go is to the people who unemployed you, namely the private sector. But in our country, that's kind of a taboo, so we get angry at politicians. Anyway, to go to your question.
Yeah.
The economy is based on the government. In all economies, they are in some significant way based on the government. Let me give you a couple of examples. Here in the United States, we have something called money. The green pieces of paper, or they're actually multicolored these days, and all the coins that jingle in our pockets. Now, the government is the monopolist of money. Only the government can produce money. Only the government can print it, stamp it out, and circulate it. If you try to do that yourself, people come and put you in jail because you're not allowed to do that. So the thing that makes the world go round, the thing that drives an awful lot of our businesses and individuals in their daily decisions, money, is an absolute monopoly controlled by the government. Does that make us socialist? I don't think so. I don't think that makes any sense. Give you another example. You cannot have an insurance policy in the United States unless the company that issues it goes before one of the 50 state commissions in our 50 states and gets the approval of the government for the rates it charges and the programs it offers and the premiums it arranges. Does that mean we have a socialist economy? I don't think so. These are all private insurance companies, but there's government oversight, and so it goes. I think it's a silly kind of rule. It really makes no sense. If you really applied it literally, since the government is important in every economic system in the world today, you would end up living in the world of Ms. O'Donnell there, in which everybody would be called socialist. So it's a bit of a game playing on the antipathy of the American people to the government, the sense that the government is the root of the evil, and just pandering to that by saying almost anything that comes to your mind.
So essentially, Christine O'Donnell's hypothesis is so flawed that we can't even really assess it. I mean, it's in another world.
Yeah, she made it up as she went along. I have no idea, as you do, what based on means. But it would be perfectly reasonable to say that all modern economies are based on the monetary system of each country, and the monetary system of each country in the world is a governmental monopoly. So by that standard, we're all living in a socialist world, and, people like Ms. O'Donnell must be wondering, if they maybe ought to change planets. A much more reasonable approach would be to say, look, and this has been the tradition for those who follow this, that a socialist economy is one where the majority or the dominant acts of producing goods and services are undertaken not by private enterprises, but by some sort of collective enterprises, either a national government or a regional government, and that it's a government activity. In other words, how we in our society have governments running most of our public parks. If you want to go to the park with your dog or your child, you go to something which is paid for, maintained, cleaned, etc., by the government that runs the parks. If we extended the same thing and had the government running the ice cream parlor and the gas station and the restaurants, etc., well, then you might talk about a socialist system because we've socialized other kinds of production along the same lines that we handle things like public parks, or to take another example that may strike you as remarkable, the military. We don't allow the United States Army to be a private enterprise. That is a governmental enterprise.
Well, we allow it in a sense in Iraq, right, with the contractors.
That's right. It's an interesting and it's an unusual step that people notice that we are, in fact, in Iraq fighting that war, half with the traditional governmental army, and then the other half, yes, with this private army, and that's worrying an awful lot of people who, by the way, are very conservative and who worry that a private army will be doing things that we will all be responsible for, because for the people who get killed, it's not all that interesting whether the soldier was a public or a private, but for us as a nation, to be at war and have that be something that a private company is making money off of could be, and I think should be, quite worrisome.
We just have a little bit of time here, and I want to get your thoughts on. I get the feeling that the socialist accusations that now we're getting from much of the right wing, whether it's about specific politicians or the government or other countries, in some way it's having the opposite effect on some young people, making people, I don't know if curious is the right word, or sympathetic. Do you get the same sense that some of the right-wing socialism rhetoric is backfiring?
Absolutely. I've been telling this to people for a good 6 months now. I used to get questions from time to time, and I do a lot of public speaking, about socialism or communism. And all that those questioners ever meant was they got worried by something I said. Did that mean that I wanted there to be Russia here in the United States or China here in the United States or that kind of thing? And then I would explain patiently, no, I'm not interested in that. That's a lesson we have to learn how not to do, et cetera, et cetera. Over the last 6 months, it's completely different. It's mostly young people, as you suggest, raise their hands, ask a question. And the question, no matter what words they use, boils down to this. What is this socialism I keep hearing about? So I started asking questions back because I was so taken with the fact they didn't want me to talk about Russia and China. They had no interest in that or no knowledge much about it either. What were they doing? And then they explained it to me. These are young people who, while they have some misgivings, they basically like Barack Obama. They still like Barack Obama, despite being somewhat disappointed by what he has done and hasn't done. But they basically like him. Then they notice these older, people they don't much sympathize, calling him names, one of which is socialist.
Right.
So they make a little equation which isn't all that surprising. If somebody they like is being called this name, they'd like to know more about the name, but they're liking to know from a point, as you put it, of a bit of sympathy. They're basically, they want me to explain that maybe socialism is something they would get something out of by pursuing it a bit further, which, by the way, I believe, so I encourage them to do that. And they're very happy with that answer, and they go off more interested and probably more sympathetic to socialism than they would ever have been if the right wing had not wanted to call Obama that particular name. It may resonate with old people who come out of the Cold War. It does not resonate with young people.
Incredible. We've been speaking with Professor Emeritus of Economics at my alma mater, the University of Massachusetts, and currently visiting at the New School University in New York City. Thanks so much for calling in today.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Okay, we'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Fascinating, Louis. So we'll take a break, and we'll be back with more after this. And thanks to Richard Wolff. We'll be back.
You've been listening to Midweek Politics with Dave Pakman.
Midweek Politics is made possible by listeners like you and by Greenfield Savings Bank, building a strong community one account at a time, with neighborhood offices in Greenfield, Amherst, Conway, Shelburne Falls, South Deerfield, and Turners Falls, and online at greenfieldsavings.com. By the Daily Hampshire Gazette and GazetteNet.com, connecting our communities with local news and information. By DIF Design, specializing in custom business websites at DIFdesign.com. Find out more about underwriting Midweek Politics at midweekpolitics.com.